you'll enjoy this session, and I'll come at the end and wrap it up. For right now, I'll turn it over to Nigel Key, who is moderating this session.
Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon and welcome everybody. This session is going to focus largely on issues of land access for beginning farmers. Land is by far the most valuable asset used in agricultural production. According to the Economic Research Service, the value of farm real estate accounted for over 80% of the total value of U.S. farm assets. The National Young Farmers Coalition surveyed beginning farmers and found that access to land was their biggest concern. In fact, beginning farmers cited finding land that is affordable to buy as their #1 challenge. Agricultural real estate doubled in value between 2004 and 2013, and land has maintained its value ever since then, even though agricultural income has declined substantially. When land prices are high relative to what can be earned farming, then there's going to be substantial financial risks associated with starting a farm. Even for farmers who have inherited some farmland, purchasing land will usually require substantial savings and external financing. Hence, even for most beginning farmers, purchasing land requires off-farm income, and access to land is intrinsically tied up with issues of access to credit. In addition to affordability, the availability of land can also be an obstacle. There may not be land available for sale or rent near a farmer's existing plots, making it difficult for farmers to operate efficiently. Tenancy arrangements can also pose obstacles for beginning farmers. Land access may not be secure, and farmers may not be able to make long-run infrastructure or soil quality investments on their land if they risk losing their lease. This session will delve into many of these issues. We have 5 presentations. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to talk, and we'll have a question and answer session after all the presentations are over at about 3:20 Central Time. You can submit your questions electronically at any time, but I encourage you to do that early. When you do submit a question, if you'd like to a particular speaker to address the question, please indicate that. So now I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Scott Callahan. Scott is an economist at the USDA Economic Research Service. Scott's presentation will provide an overview of some recent ERS research on beginning farmers. Scott, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. Yes, so thank you, Nigel. So this presentation is titled Access to Farmland for Beginning and Socially Disadvantaged Farmers. I've been working with Daniel Hellerstein on developing this research. Next slide. So this presentation presents preliminary findings from a congressionally mandated report. So in the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress requested we study 2 topics: barriers to entry for beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers, and the effect of various federal programs, to include the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, land transition and financing programs, and others on farmland access, tenure, transition, and succession for beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers. Now, among the government programs, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program is intended to purchase urban development rights for agricultural land, which takes this land off the table for urban development, which should reduce the land values and thus help land access for producers, including socially disadvantaged beginning farmers. Conservation Reserve Program takes environmentally sensitive land out of agricultural production. This could potentially reduce land access for producers, including socially disadvantaged beginning farmers. USDA also has a transition incentives program to try to transition CRP land from CRP to beginning and socially disadvantaged producers. So there are several programs that Congress wants us to look at to see if these programs are helping or hindering land access issues. And so this presentation will present preliminary statistics from this ongoing research. Next slide, please. So as far as our data sources, we've pulled data from a wide variety of sources. So our dependent variables for our analysis come from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. This includes, these dependent variables are the percentage of beginning farming operations and the percentage of socially disadvantaged farming operations. We also pull a couple of land access measures, namely percentage of cropland acres and land value per acre from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. The most unique data that we're pulling for this comes from the 2014 Tenure, Ownership, and Transition of Agricultural Land Survey, also called the Total Survey. This is a one-off survey that delves deep into the landlord-tenant relationships between producers and non-operator landlords. So from this data set, we obtain the total amount of land that is rented out. We can look at the average size of a lease. We look at the percentage of leases renewed annually. We can also look at things like the average length of time that a landlord-tenant relationship, how long that relationship is on average. Congress asks us to look at the various federal loan programs. And so we use the USDA race, ethnicity, and gender program statistics, also known as RegStats, to look at participation in the FSA direct and guaranteed loan programs. We also choose to include a number of standard federal programs from the Farm Services Agency. We're looking at the Conservation Reserve Program and the Agricultural Risk Coverage and Price Loss Coverage programs, looking at payments per acre. From Risk Management Agency, we're looking at crop insurance indemnities and total premiums per acre. And to look at the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, we obtain data on enrolled acreage from the National Resources Conservation Services. Next slide, please. So we want to be very clear about the limitations of this approach. So first of all, our data are aggregated at the county level, but we only know county totals. We do not know the values of various measures specifically for beginning or socially disadvantaged producers. We only know the totals at the county level. One other limitation is because there's only been one iteration of the total survey thus far, we only have a 1-year cross-section of data from that survey. So we're unable to use panel data style identification strategies. So we want to stress that the analysis we're going to present here should be thought of as suggestive, but not causal. Essentially, we're trying to measure correlations without necessarily measuring, without identifying causal effects. Next slide, please. Okay, so first we want to be really clear about how we're defining our dependent variables for this analysis. So for beginning farmers, our dependent variable is the beginning farm share of the county's total farming operations. So we classify an operation as a beginning operation if all operators have 10 or fewer years of experience. And so this variable is the number of beginning farmer operations divided by the total number of operations at the county level. For socially disadvantaged farmers, we first classify an operation as socially disadvantaged if the operation has at least one non-white or Hispanic operator. And so our dependent variable here is the number of SDA operations, socially disadvantaged operations, according to that definition, divided by the total number of operations at the county level. Next slide, please. So first, let me show you some graphs here. So this first graph is the distribution of beginning operations. And so here we can see, well, one other thing I would point out is in each of these graphs, you'll see this grayed out portion. These are states that are that the total survey is not representative of. So our analysis is constrained to the 25 states included in the total survey. So the grayed out states are the ones not included. So overall here, we can see that while there's a lot of heterogeneity in which counties have more or fewer beginning operations, we see beginning operations are somewhat less common in the Midwest and Plains states. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Whoops, I think, sorry, can you back up one? Sorry. Okay, so here we have the distribution of socially disadvantaged operations. And here we see a much stronger trend. We see higher percentages of socially disadvantaged operations in the southeastern US. We see relatively low percentages of socially disadvantaged operations in the Midwest and in the Northeast. We also see higher percentages of socially disadvantaged operations in the Western US. Next slide, please. All right, so here we wanted to look at the percentage point difference between the underlying population versus the percentage of operators that are socially disadvantaged to get some sense of how these compare. All right, so the counties in blue, what that signifies is that the percentage of producers that are socially disadvantaged is higher than the percentage of people that meet the socially disadvantaged definition. While the lighter red shades mean, or I should say the darker the red shade, the bigger the difference between the percentage of the population that is socially disadvantaged and the percentage of producers that are socially disadvantaged. And if the county population was less than 10% socially disadvantaged, we've set that in gray just so that the measure is well defined. And here we see that the biggest disparities are in the southwestern US. You'll see certain pockets in Arizona and New Mexico where socially disadvantaged operators they exceed the socially disadvantaged population in percentage difference terms. These roughly correspond to Native American reservations in Arizona and New Mexico. Next slide, please. All right, so here's some descriptive statistics. So start with the dependent variables. From the 2017 Census of Agriculture, we see 21.5% of operations are classified as beginning on average. The median is comparable at about 20%, while 15.6% of operations, are classified as socially disadvantaged with a median of around 11%. Below this are the land access measures that we pulled from the 2014 total survey. And so first, we have the percentage of land transferring in 5 years, expected to transfer in 5 years. We see that the average of this is 15%. That means 15% of non-operator landlords anticipate transferring their land in some point in the next 5 years. However, only 3% of their land they expect to transfer to non-family members. So a decent percentage is going to be transferred, but most of that will be transferred to family members rather than to other producers or landlords, potentially including social disadvantage and beginning operations. The percentage of land leased is roughly 52%. The average acreage of a lease is around 94 acres with a median of 11 acres. So this is pretty highly skewed. The percentage of land that is leased on annual contracts is quite high at 70%. However, the average landlord-tenant relationship length is in excess of 10 years. So what this means is while most of these contracts are renewed annually, they're probably renewed to the same operator. They're just renegotiating terms on an annual basis. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have descriptive statistics from the administrative data that we pulled. So from RegStats, we're able to look at the percentage of applicants that are socially disadvantaged. We can also look at the percentage of applications that were successful by race and ethnicity categories. So here we're looking at the percentage of applications made by socially disadvantaged operators to the direct and guaranteed loan programs that are accepted. And this is approximately 76%. When we compare this to the percentage of all direct and guaranteed loan program applications that are accepted, it's very comparable, about 75%. In average terms, the percentage of cropland that is enrolled in general sign-up Conservation Reserve Program, this is around 3.5% on average. And this is an average between 2014 and 2017. While for continuous sign-up CRP, this is around 2% of cropland acres are enrolled in continuous sign-up CRP. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Transition Incentive Program is intended to facilitate the transfer of land from the CRP program to beginning or socially disadvantaged operations. Only 0.4% of cropland acres are enrolled in that program. And the percentage of cropland acres enrolled in the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program is around 0.1%. And that's from the origin of conservation easements to 2017. Next slide, please. All right, so here are the regression results. Again, I want to be very clear that this should be thought of as statistical associations and not as causal relationships. And what we see here is for our land access measures, so the log of average lease size, total size of leases, percentage of cropland acres, its conservation reserve program variables, etc. None of these are statistically significant. The only variables that we find any statistical significance are the percentage of livestock sales, where there's a negative statistical association, and the percentage of direct-to-consumer sales, where we find a positive and significant statistical association. Now, this is not to mean necessarily that that these measures aren't in fact significant in some way. Again, there are many limitations to this approach, and we are somewhat data constrained. For socially disadvantaged operations, on the other hand, we see a little bit more statistical significance in our land access measures. So for example, we see a negative statistical association with the average lease size. So in counties where leases tend to be larger, we see a lower percentage of socially disadvantaged operations. Same with the percentage of cropland acres. We see a negative statistical association here, suggesting areas with or counties with higher percentage of cropland versus pasture land, we see a lower percentage of socially disadvantaged operations. We also see a negative statistical association with the average length of a landlord-tenant relationship. When this average landlord-tenant relationship is longer, we see a lower percentage or a negative statistical association with the percentage of socially disadvantaged operations. As we should expect, counties with a higher total population of socially disadvantaged people, we see more socially disadvantaged operations, and counties with more participation among socially disadvantaged operators in the direct and guaranteed loan programs, we see more socially disadvantaged operations. For the crop insurance payments and for our PLC program and the ASEP program, we do not see any statistical significance. For the percentage of sales, we see negative associations with both the percentage of field crop sales and the percentage of livestock sales. Next slide, please. Okay, so to conclude, we don't find any evidence that our measures of land access are correlated with the percentage of beginning farming operations. And I want to stress again that this is not conclusive in that these measures, or the underlying truth is that there is no relationship. Our strategy is incapable of measuring it if it exists. We do find some evidence that our land access measures are correlated with the percentage of beginning, or excuse me, with the percentage of socially disadvantaged operations, namely negative statistical associations with average lease size, percentage of cropland acres, average landlord-tenant relationship length. This suggests SDA operations may be crowded out in counties with larger leases and longer standing lease arrangements. We find positive statistical associations with the percentage of total population that is socially disadvantaged, percentage of successful loan applications by socially disadvantaged operators. And so, again, those are statistically associated. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I'd like to now introduce our speakers for our second presentation, Andrew Stevens and Karin Wu. Andrew is an assistant professor of agricultural and applied economics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Karin is pursuing her PhD in the same department. The presentation concerns the profitability of beginning farms and examines how land tenancy affects the adoption of farming practices with long-term agronomic benefits. Andrew?
Thanks so much. It's a thrill to be able to present here, and I'm excited to share our preliminary results with this audience. Karin and I are both at UW-Madison and have been working on this for about half a year. So we wanted to look at what the effect of land tenure, and when we use that word, we mean whether a farmer owns some or all of their land or rents some or all of their land, and how this land tenure could affect, oh, sorry, one back, please. Thanks. How these things could affect long-term on-farm investments. So we know from previous work that beginning farmers and ranchers are more likely to adopt new technologies, adopt new practices, be concerned about investing in soil health, but that all of these practices or these technologies rely on long-term access to the same land or the expectation of access to the same land to reap future benefits of current investments. So we hypothesize that there's some sort of trade-off between short-run cash flow and these long-term investments for future returns. And sussing that out is somewhat of an empirical question. Next slide, please. Thanks. So our research question here is, among beginning farmers and ranchers, what are the relationships between land ownership or land tenure on production, expenditures on repairs and maintenance, net farm income, and operator household income coming from farm activities? And beyond that, we're interested in how these relationships vary across farm type, whether we're looking at crop farms versus livestock farms, high sales versus low sale farms, and things of that nature. So I'm going to turn things over to Karin to talk a bit about our data source, which is a little different from what Scott was using, some of the restrictions we face, and then how we're organizing things.
Thanks, Andrew. So next slide, please. I will continue by introducing the data used in this research. So we used the state-level farm structural and finance estimation data of the chosen individual farms farm ARMS, which is the Agricultural Research Management Survey. As some of you already know, that ARMS is a model-based survey with a series of interviews with the targeted farms by a stratified sampling design. Our data set used 15 heavily sampled states from 2003 to 2018, which is also shown in the map below. Given our intention to separate the samples into subgroups, for example, by the age of the operators, we have an imbalanced panels for each regression we run in this research. Next slide, please. In line with the question survey in ARMS, we are unable to capture the beginning farms sample by definition. Therefore, we take young operators as a proxy for beginning farms and ranchers. According to the Key and Lyons 2019 report, beginning farmers or rancher has taken 72% of the less than 55 years old sample and 30% in the less than 35 years old sample. In order to show the consistency, we ran the multiple regressions with 3 different age subgroups, which are the less than 35, less than 45, and less than 55 years old sample. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we will introduce the categories we used in quantifying the land tenure effect on the outcome of different farm groups. When analyzing the effect of tenure on farm outcomes, we can take the whole sample into the regression to see the big picture. Could you go back to the previous slide? Thank you. However, if we separate it into different types of farms, it can tell us different kind of story. So given the time constraint, we will only be showing the result by 2 different categories, which are the different crop specialties and economic class of the farm household. For the crop specialty, we categorize the farms into crop farms and livestock farms. As for the economic class, we classify the farms into 4 groups based on their gross farm sales. So the two additional farm types that we wouldn't show here is classified by the occupation of the farm operator and farm sales, which includes the commercial farms, intermediate farms, and resident farms, as well as the low sale and the moderate sale and non-professional farms. So if you are interested, we will love to talk to you about this in the Q&A section. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, the 4 outcome variables we are interested in includes the total production, the expenditure on repair and maintenance, the net farm income, and income from farming. And also the control variable in our regression includes the operator characteristics, such as working hours on the farm, the occupation, the education, and for the farm characteristics, we include the farm size and the fixed expenses of the farm. Also, for the result we will show later includes the state year fixed effect. So let me focus now on our variables of interest, which is the land tenure. So we captured the land tenure using 2 different variables separately, which is the owned sum or all land and rent sum or all lands. So the original variables in ARMS data reports the proportion of the full owned lander, part landowner and tenants. So we add up the full owner and part owner as well as the full renter and part renter to create the 2 variables shown here. So in our next few slides, we will only display the results of the 2 variables in each regressions. So with that, I will turn back to Andrew for the empirical analysis results.
Thanks, Karin. And to our audience, we hear that the slides are kind of moving on their own here. So thanks very much to our facilitators working in the background. We really appreciate you. So really briefly to talk through what our empirical analysis looks like, we're going to be running a bunch of fixed effects regression on our panel data, where we're including state and year fixed effects. Everything I'm going to show you has one of our 4 outcome variables on the left-hand slide, where that's either production, expenses for repairs and maintenance, net farm income, or household income from farming. We're including all of our X's as controls, which Karin discussed, our fixed effects. And then we're either going to be controlling for land tenure as owning some or all of your land, or renting some or all of your land. And what we're interested in is the coefficient on that land tenure variable. So just before I show you some of the results, every single thing you see is going to be one of these betas. And every result you see comes from its own regression. So we run this kind of regression on a bunch of different slicing and dicing of the ARMS data. And what we're reporting out are the interesting betas that come out of these different regressions. Next slide, please. So the first thing we see popping out of our exploratory research is that when we look at crop farms versus livestock farms, renting land is correlated with increased production on beginning crop farms, which you can see in the lighter red bars on the left-hand figure, but decreased production on beginning livestock farms, which you can see on those lighter red bars on the right-hand graph. What you're looking at on these graphs, on the y-axis is our outcome variable of interest. Here, this is total value of farm production measured in thousands of dollars. And then the light red bars are the betas on the variable rents some or all of your land, and the dark red bars are the beta coefficients on the owns some or all of your land variable. We show 3 different definitions of beginning farmer and rancher defined by age. So on the left is being under 35, in the middle less than 45, and on the right less than 55. If our bars look pretty consistent across those 3 definitions, we're even more confident that we're picking up a real story of interest here. Next slide, please. Also looking at crop farms versus livestock farms, we're interested in household income from farming. And we see that beginning livestock farmers who rent some or all of their land have higher household farming incomes than those who own all of their land. Great, this works. We can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So now we're going to transition to looking at different economic classes of farms and ranches, which is defined by gross farm sales. So for these operations with sales less than $50,000, we see that renting land is associated with higher production, and owning land is associated with lower production. Next slide, please. I should mention briefly that all of the whiskers on these plots are 95% confidence intervals. I'm sorry I missed that earlier. Here we see with these same operations that have sales less than $500,000, owning land is associated, sorry, back one, please. Yeah, thank you. With lower repair and maintenance costs. And we see that both for the operations with sales under 250,000 and for those with sales under 500,000. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at farms with higher levels of sales. And the one I want to focus on here is the right figure, which is showing farms with sales over $1 million. And here we see that owning land is associated with higher repair and maintenance costs among these beginning farmers. Next slide, please. Here, again, we're focused on these farms with sales over $1 million, and we see that owning land is associated with lower net farm income for operations with these high sales. However, here we don't have enough observations of farmers under 35 to run those regressions. So here we're just reporting the results, assuming beginning farmer is either under 45 or under 55. Next slide, please. All right, finally, for the results that I'm going to talk about visually here at least, we see that renting land is associated with higher household income from farming for operations with sales between $500,000 and $1 million. And you kind of have to squint to see that on the left-hand graph. That is a statistically significant result in the light red bar. And it's scaled that way so that the y-axis is the same as on the right-hand graph, but it is a positive effect. But we see that for these operations with sales over $1 million, owning land is associated with lower household income from farming. Next slide, please. So this is sort of the most important slide in the presentation for summarizing what we find. I want to acknowledge that this was primarily exploratory research. We're controlling for a lot of unobservable things with our state and year fixed effects, our control variables, so on and so forth. But these are not causal estimates of land tenure on these various outcomes. And we run a whole lot of different regressions and are only reporting the results that pop out as statistically significant and interesting for policy. So our main takeaways here, first is that for crop farms, renting land is associated with higher production, but not necessarily higher income. So one possible explanation for that is that we're seeing these beginning farmers and ranchers sacrifice future productivity in order to cover current operating expenses and or rent. Again, we don't have direct evidence of that mechanism, but it would be consistent with what we find. Second, for livestock farms, renting land is associated with lower production and also higher income for these beginning farmers and ranchers. And so it's possible here that these renters are avoiding costs that are associated with farm ownership. Again, I don't know necessarily what those costs would be, but our results point us in that direction. Next, for farms with sales below $500,000, we see that beginning farmers and ranchers who rent produce more, and those who own produce less. This suggests that there might be a trade-off between immediate production and future production. And then also beginning farmers and ranchers who own land have lower repair and maintenance costs. However, when we look at the farms with much higher sales, over $1 million, owning your land now seems to have a positive association with repair and maintenance costs, and beginning farmers and ranchers who own also have lower net farm incomes. Next slide, please. So this is our penultimate slide. I've already mentioned that our results are a little limited. We are using state level aggregated data with a relatively small sample size. We're reporting correlations, not causal relationships. Nonetheless, I think this asks some really interesting follow-up questions, and we hope in future work to use some of the more restricted ARMS data to look at operation-specific data and sort of use this exploratory work to zero in on some better posed causal research questions. We look forward to your future questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrew and Karin. Now I'd like to introduce our third presenter, Jim Oldham. Jim is the Executive Director of Equity Trust Incorporated, a Massachusetts-based nonprofit. Jim will discuss a program that has facilitated land transfers from retiring to beginning farmers and has allowed young farmers to purchase leased land. Jim?
Thank you. I'm going to be talking about a pilot program that Equity Trust ran for the last 6 years in Eastern New York that was promoting and demonstrating working farm easements. That's conservation easements that are specifically designed to keep farmland in production by keeping it affordable and accessible to farmers. It wasn't a research project per se, so unlike the other papers, I'm not presenting research, but we think that some of the results and data that we got out of the work are worth sharing, so I'm happy to do that today. Next slide, please. So as a little bit of background, I just want to share Equity Trust is a nonprofit based in Massachusetts, and we've been working on farmland preservation for over 25 years. Since the 1990s, our Farms for Farmers program works nationally, partnering with farmers and land trusts to facilitate farm protection projects. And we focus on farmland protection, but beyond that, protecting everything that it takes to keep a working farm productive. So we want to protect the land, but also the infrastructure, and also ensure that there's going to be a farmer on the land who can farm it. And we really, as others have talked about, we see the role of farmer ownership as supporting security and control and wealth building that then is what allows a farmer to make long-term planning and investment. Next slide, please. So Nigel already spoke about the challenges of affordability, so I won't restate the young farmers survey information, but again, it's a national problem. It's a problem for first-generation farmers and for farmers coming from farm families. I just want to point out the lower statistic on this slide focuses on the region where we're working in the Hudson Valley, in New York's Hudson Valley. In the 20 years that led up to and included our period of working there, farmland in the various counties we've worked in increased in value between 50 to 150%. And that's data from the National Agricultural Statistics Service, Quick Stats. Next slide, please. And it's important to note that the traditional tool for protecting farmland, keeping it in agriculture, is the conservation easement. That's been the primary tool for many years, but in many places, farms protected with conservation easements still won't necessarily remain in production. And another young farmers survey that actually came out right around the time we were starting our work in the Hudson Valley surveyed land conservation professionals from around the country and found a quarter of them nationally and nearly a third in the Northeast were reporting that farms protected with conservation easements were being purchased by non-farmers and no longer producing, no longer growing food. They were being used as private estates and otherwise being, even though they couldn't be developed, they could stop being productive farms. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what our work that I'm reporting on is was a pilot project, as I said, carried out in 15 counties in New York State, in the eastern portion of New York, running from up and down the Hudson River between New York City and Albany, the counties on both sides of the river. And we had a program that was introducing protections to keep farms affordable to farmers using two different tools. The conservation tool that I'll be talking about today, I'm sorry, the conservation easement tool that I'll be talking about today, and a second tool that I'd be happy to answer people's questions about at some other point, which is shared equity ownership, basically nonprofit ownership with long-term leases for farmers, ground leases for farmers, and shared equity in the infrastructure. But so what our program did was it provided technical assistance in creating, drafting conservation easements that would protect long-term affordability of farms. We offered short-term bridge loans to secure land while waiting for it to be protected. And we brought funding to the table to pay for the restrictions that we were helping create. And it was designed to complement the existing farmland protection efforts, state programs, and the regional conservation land trusts that were carrying out there. Next slide. Next slide, please. So I'm not sure what's happening. I don't see the next slide on my screen, but I've lost the slides on my thing, so please hold on a second. I guess they're coming back in a moment. Okay, so when we started our program in New York, as we were launching our program in 2013, working farm easements, that's again, conservation easements that include resale price restrictions and other tools to ensure that farmer buyers will have the first option to purchase, they were rare in New York. There was one in our target area, in our program area in the Hudson Valley, held by the Agricultural Stewardship Association, in a farm that was protected in 2008. South of us on Long Island, in an area of very high land prices, Peconic Land Trust has done some work with this. And in Massachusetts and Vermont, two states bordering our region, there are robust state programs that use what they call an option to purchase at agricultural value, which is a protection very similar to the one I'm about to describe, where they've been protecting farms to keep them in production for, in the case of Massachusetts, since 1994, and Vermont since 2003. So that, but in New York itself, we didn't have that. So here I want to apologize because I realized after submitting my slides, I never actually spelled out this PPR that I'm talking about. The tool that we worked out, that we developed with our partners for New York and developed to include in New York easements according to New York law, is a preemptive purchase right. And what it is, it's a right that is included in the conservation easement that lets the easement holder, gives the easement holder a first right to purchase the farm when it goes up for sale. That right is only, it's not an option that they can exercise at any time, but it's a first right of refusal when the farm is put up for sale. And what's crucial about this is it's not going to be triggered if the farm is being sold to a farmer or to a family member of the current owner, but it will be triggered if it's being sold to a non-farmer. And when the easement holder, when the right is triggered, the easement holder can purchase the farm, or more likely can assign the purchase right to another farmer. So essentially, there are two complementary pieces to this tool. One, it encourages farmer-to-farmer purchases by allowing sales to qualified farmers, but making other sales subject to this purchase right. And by a qualified farmer, it typically means someone who's earned more than 50% of their income from farming for the past 2 years. And secondly, there's a price limitation that the property must be sold for its agricultural value as determined by appraisal. Next slide, please. So the, can I have the next slide, please? The property owner, when the property is ready to be sold, the property owner provides notice to the easement holder, and the agricultural value of the property is going to be, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the next slide. Could I see the next slide, please? Thank you. So property owner provides notice for any transfer, and whether or not the transfer is going to be an exempt purchase. If it's an exempt purchase, it just goes ahead. So if it's a qualified farmer or family member, they get to buy the property as long as the sale is for that agricultural value. If the transfer is not exempt, the easement holder has a choice. They can exercise their right to purchase, or they can assign it to a farmer buyer who they might find through a request for proposals or through a farm seeker program, or they can waive the right and allow a transfer if the purchaser is someone with a farm business plan and the capacity to keep the property productive. Next slide. I won't go into detail, but I'll just mention that sometimes our preemptive purchase right is combined with other restrictions in the easement, also designed to preserve affordability. It might be limits on the size or number of residential buildings, since they can really have a big impact on the affordability of the farm. And in 2 of the farms that we protected in this program, we included an affirmative farming requirement. And again, I don't want to get into that now, but I'd be happy to answer questions about that later. Next slide. So I'm going to quickly just describe 3 experiences, 3 of the farms we protected, and how the preemptive purchase right contributed to each situation. In the first case, we were working with a farm in the Upper Hudson Valley that's been in production for over 200 years. There were longtime farmers ready to retire, looking to sell the property. They needed to sell the property for its full value, because they were going to buy a house someplace else, needed to retire. They needed to extract the full value of the property. But the incoming farmers, even though they were experienced farmers, even though they already had a diversified CSA business, they really couldn't come close to paying that market price. Next slide. So first of all, we provided a bridge loan so that there could be an immediate purchase and the retiring farmers could exit, and then the incoming farmers could start farming while waiting for us to put together a protection package, because it sometimes can take 2 to 3 years to get the funding and go through the programs that provide that funding. In the end, the farmers were able to sell the development rights, which lowered their cost of acquisition by about 56%. The preemptive purchase right reduced it by another 7%. So it wasn't a huge difference, but together the conservation easement, including the preemptive purchase right, brought the sale down to less than $300,000. significantly, well less than half of the original price. And for that extra purchase that we paid for the preemptive purchase right, we locked in the fact that for future transfers, this farm will always be sold for its agricultural value, which wouldn't have been the case if we had just purchased the development rights, because it still could have been sold for estates. Next slide. So this is a large, for the Hudson Valley, a large dairy farm. Again, a longtime farm, a fourth generation farm. They already owned this land, almost about 350 acres. They rent a lot more land, and it's a multi-generational farm. And the goal of the family is to keep it going, to pass it down to the next generation and keep it going. Next slide, please. So the family sold the easement with the preemptive purchase right. Again, we see the development rights with the bulk of the cost of the easement, about 56 of the unrestricted value, but the preemptive purchase right brought it down nearly another 10%. So they ended up with the land value reduced by about 2/3 from its unrestricted value. The family immediately used the proceeds to acquire additional land, so they changed their ratio of renting and ownership, and are using the sale to support the ongoing transfer to the next generation, which again, to keep the farm viable through another generation. Next slide. And the final case is we're moving down the Hudson Valley. So each of these have gone south with each of the three examples. A young farm family that had been leasing land, producing milk, eggs, vegetables, goats for milk. And they have a very successful farm store right in the commuter region outside of New York City, about 50 miles north of New York City. The owner, a non-farmer, wanted to sell the land, but the property price tag was going to be $1 million, over $1 million. And so it was just not viable for the young farmers. Next slide. So what we ended up being able to do was, in a simultaneous closing, the farmers purchased the land and sold an easement that includes both the preemptive purchase right, that resale restriction that I described earlier, and an affirmative farming covenant that requires them to continue to farm the land and produce a minimum commercial return on an annual basis. The development rights were valued at about 34% of the unrestricted value, and that preemptive purchase right in the affirmative covenant brought the price down by another 20% of that original value. And that impact was much larger here because of the location, because of the large farmhouse that was involved, and because of that affirmative covenant. But what it did was it made the farm affordable that wouldn't have otherwise been affordable. Next slide, please. So in summary, those are 3 of 13 farms that we protected between 2015 and 2020. You'll notice there's a lag at the beginning. Our program officially ran from 2013 to 2019, but these projects are slow being carried out. So the actual farm closings, the protection closings were 2015 to 2020. Farms ranged in size a lot, from a very small one of 20 acres outside of Albany to a 400+ acre grazing operation. And diverse types of farms, a wide range of farms. And one of the things that we were really happy with was we partnered with 6 different land trusts on these easements. So we were really introducing this tool to the region, and a lot of land trusts were excited to use it. So that was very satisfying. Next slide, please. So although the preemptive purchase right, our program brought in funding and was funding this affordability restriction, the preemptive purchase right, but public funding was critical to most of these easements. Not all of them, but most of them had funding from either the ASEP program, USDA's ASEP program, or New York State's Farm Protection Implementation Grant Program, the FPIG program in New York. And as we were carrying out this work, we were pleased that in part because of what we were doing, in part because of the advocacy of the Young Farmers Coalition and American Farmland Trust and others, New York State passed a Working Farm Protection Act, making these preemptive purchase rights eligible for state funding. Next slide, please. I've got just 2 more slides, I think. So I just wanted to quickly highlight what we're seeing in terms of impact on these of these protections. By capping the resale price and preventing sales to non-farmers, the preemptive purchase right reduced farm values by 7 to 20% of the unrestricted value, which is another way to say it is we were reducing the price of the farms anywhere from 13 to 50% lower than they would have been restricted had we just purchased the development rights. And these numbers are derived through appraisals. So this is what the appraisers were telling us they thought the farm would be worth. They were the appraisals that were used to value the easements. And 5 different appraisers worked with us to do this. And although their methodologies were somewhat different, or their approaches sometimes were somewhat different, which is kind of normal because it's such a new tool, their results were actually quite consistent. So I've been asked to wrap up. So I just want to finalize by saying, can we go back real quick to the last slide? So there are many factors that play into the variation in values, location, size of farms, and whether or not there's a residence all play a big role. Last slide, please. So what we found was that these resale restrictions facilitate farmer-to-farmer sales and intergenerational sales. They helped lessees access land, buy land, and they reduced farmer debt. This protection runs with the land. So what's key with these working farm easements is that for a relatively small price now, you saw that they were only a fraction of the total price of the easement. For that small upfront investment, they're a guarantee that not only these farmers can get on the land, but the next farmers and the next ones after them can also get on the land. So this was a pilot project. We were introducing it to one region, but we think that these tools show a lot of promise outside of the areas where they're currently used, Massachusetts, Vermont, and now Eastern New York. Thanks.
Hi, thank you, Jim. We had a little bit of a technical glitch earlier, so we're going to change out the slide deck. And in the meantime, I want to just take one question before our question and answer session, before we get back to our last 2 speakers. Let me just start with this the question with the most votes here. Question is, why is it a good idea for beginning farmers to acquire marginal CRP land? Doesn't this put them behind from the start? I'm not sure that I recall anybody advocating necessarily that it's a good idea for farmers to acquire marginal CRP land, but the USDA does have programs to try to match retiring landlords with CRP land to beginning farmers. Does anybody want to speak to this question? I think it was first asked during Scott's presentation, but does anybody with some familiarity with this program want to speak to that? The issue of CRP land versus and those kind of USDA programs?
Yeah, so what I would just say is, one, that is how that program works. Whether or not that's the best avenue to go, I mean, that's up to beginning farmers and landlords to decide. But what I will say is that there is potential, or at least the intuition is that if there's the more land that is enrolled in CRP, the less total amount of land is available for production, and the less total land available for production, potentially, the harder it will be for everyone, including socially disadvantaged beginning farmers, to access land. So that's kind of the intuition we're working off of when we include, when we're looking at CRP in my land access study.
Right, because you were trying to explain in your research what's the share of beginning farmers in each county, essentially. Do we see more beginning farmers in regions where there's less CRP land available versus more CRP land? Is that
right? So I mean, we're just trying to see what's correlated with what.
Right.
And again, we're not trying to describe some great causal mechanism. Right. We just trying to check all the boxes, see if there is any correlation there.
Right. So that was the reason that the variable was included in the model. Okay, looks like we've got the slide deck set up for our next speaker, who's Heather Gessner. Heather works for the South Dakota State University Extension and is currently their livestock business management field specialist. Her presentation will describe extension work to reduce barriers to entry for beginning farmers. Heather?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today with you. As you can see on that first slide, I'm going to brag a little bit on SDSU Extension's home on the SDSU campus. We're housed in the Ness School of Management and Economics. This is a totally remodeled building for us, and it's a very beautiful spot to be able to go. And hopefully I can get to go back there once again once we get out of this COVID travel restrictions and separation. So it's a very cool building. If you're familiar with some of the environmental building practices, it is a Silver Star LEED building, so it's very environmentally friendly that way. One of the key features that it has and helps us with some of our student education is that it's home to the First Dakota National E-Trading Lab. So this lab has Bloomberg terminals in it, and that marketing classroom is housed on the lower level there. So we have tons of learning education opportunities for the students that attend SDSU and move on as they're looking to purchasing ground or making leases so that they can move some of those barriers and take over family farm operations. So it's a very cool spot for us to have available, and one of the first steps that some of our beginning farmers and ranchers are taking as they try to overcome that obstacle of land purchases. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is just a slide that has my contact information. I'm going to talk about some of the presentations and the programs that we run at SDSU. If you're interested in talking to me about any of them, I'd be more than willing to work with you so that you didn't have to recreate the whole wheel as we move forward. So I'm going to highlight some of those as we go forward. The program that I just got done teaching last week, the 8th session, was the Farmland for the Next Generation sessions. It was an 8-week virtual workshop. And as it is really brand new, I have no long-term impacts to share with you about today, other than to let you know that the participants were very excited and were working forward and moving forward with a lot of their plans. So that was very exciting and rewarding component of this program. To give you a little background on what Farmland for the Next Generation is, it's a curriculum that was developed by the American Farmland Trust, supported by a 4-year educational enhancement grant from the USDA Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. I've included the award number there if you would like to look it up and find more information about it. As it is a national program, I was one of 25 trainers from across the nation trained in the program, which basically has two components. There's the direct to the producer side, so actually working with the new and beginning farmers and ranchers, and then a train the trainer side. So if you're interested in a beginning farmer curriculum in your state, that comes complete with all the teacher notes, the PowerPoints, handouts, case studies, resource lists, as well as activities for group projects, interaction, let me know. Someday when we can meet again, I'd be happy to provide you with the training and the information so that you can take it to your beginning farmers and ranchers. So as you notice on that, whoops, we can stay with that slide there. If you notice, it is an 8-week program, so it's pretty much a calendar buster. It takes quite a little bit of time to put the program together. So we tried to alleviate some of the time restraints by having a pre-meeting video that introduced them to a lot of the components of land purchases and rents and some of the rates and expenses in South Dakota and the variations across the nation that we hear about as we talk about, you know, who owns what, how is that land owned, excuse me, and your ability to afford ground that may have a rental rate that varies quite a bit across the state of South Dakota, let alone across the nation. So the sessions that we talk about are getting ready to own land and what your personal readiness is to pursue land ownership or land rent. We talk a lot about personal and business goals. Other sessions include financial assessment, land access options, finding land that may be appropriate for their operation, land assessment, leasing land and creating lease agreements, purchasing land and what the expenses are related to those purchases. And then it wraps up with a succession planning component as well, and starting those communication factors with either family members or non-family members that you might be working with. So we originally thought we were going to do this program in June or July and have a face-to-face program. It's scheduled in the evenings, so beginning farmers and ranchers and their spouses could attend after they were home from off-farm jobs, taking care of the kids and those types of things. Well, then COVID hit and backed up my planning, so we really didn't know what the plan was going to be when I should have been advertising these. So once we put that information all together, we proceeded with that August 31st start date, and then we wrapped up this past Thursday. If you look at your normal harvest calendars in South Dakota, I was worried a little bit about some of our end meetings and if we would be running into a lot of harvest issues back and forth there. But then due to some dry weather conditions and drought situations going on, not only did we bump into harvest problems at the end of the meetings, we were bumping into them almost all meetings. So we got to see the inside of a lot of combines and a lot of tractors as the producers, you know, they participated virtually via Zoom from their tractor cab while they're running grain carts and those types of things. So they participated and they remained engaged, and it was, you know, very enlightening to see couples, you know, one would be in the tractor and one would be getting the kids ready for bed and while they were participating in the course. So we can go to the next slide now, please. And you can click through all of those. So one of the things that we learned when we were putting this program together, I was originally planning on doing it face-to-face, thinking it would be about a 30-minute drive home from me. 9 o'clock was no big deal because it's still summertime and it was going to be, you know, light out at that point. I was also thinking, you know, we'd maybe have 12 participating families, so about 24 attendees. But when you do the program virtually, that really opens things up. The attendance was 72 individuals that registered, representing 39 operations from across the state of South Dakota, as well as Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Alaska, of all places. So I do have a waiting list as well of 11 families for a session that I hope to run in January or February. So when you open it up to a virtual context, you can get participation from all over the nation. So we pretty much had South Dakota covered. One thing is you're starting to put programs together and thinking about your timing. 2 hours seem to be about a decent length of time for these beginning farmers and ranchers. We do have 2 time zones in South Dakota, so keeping an eye on somebody not going to bed way late, or keeping it so that you could get home from work or do chores and those types of things before we have the program is very important. We ran a bunch of breakout sessions during each of the programs so that they could talk and interact about the information that we were giving them. So that really helped keep some of the information moving forward and making it, more hands-on, because they had to actually think about some of the information that they were doing or that they were receiving. So the last thing that I wanted this kind of a time-consuming program, both for me and for the producers, to commit to 8 sessions, was it to be a splash and dash. I wanted them to use the information and take it home and make it be something that they would actually be able to implement in the end. So they had a lot of homework. Every week they had 1, 2, 3 worksheets that they were supposed to work through or work on their financial statements and then email them to me. And a lot of them were very awesome at sending the work in. They were sent it in on time. It was very complete. They were really thinking through the topics that we presented to them. As they were creating their financial documents or improving on them, they wrote down their goals. They critically assessed their own personal readiness to purchase or rent ground and what kind of time that they could reasonably implement for their operations. Some of them are already putting those financial statements to work. August 31st was our first meeting. Some of them have already set up meetings with different lenders or FSA to look into loans back and forth that way too. So our target audience obviously was beginning and new farmers and ranchers. But as we advertised it for a family of 2, we did have the couples that registered brought father-son teams to the group. So while not necessarily the target audience, that was a good component to add in because they had some information or some feedback on a topic. So if I said, your financial statements are important and you need to worry about your cash flow statement, they were added in some different experiences that they've had working through cash flows and explaining them to lenders and those types of things. So, it wasn't really the target audience, but both sides hearing the same message, I think was also very good as we went through the program. So you can go to the next slide, please. The other program that we've been doing since about 2012 started as a joint program between the South Dakota Department of Ag and SDSU Extension. You can see we call it the Ag CEO Beginning Farmer and Rancher Symposium. One of our, one of the presenters earlier today mentioned, moving the business thinking components of beginning farmers and ranchers. And that's some of what our beginning programs that we try to do here really is trying to work for. So we target this towards college age students and we host it on campus. We've worked with professors and instructors that make the symposium part of their curriculum to attend at least one of the sessions. And then they usually have to write a paper or something like that to get 5 extra points on an exam or something like that. So that's one way to get students to attend is when you start giving extra points for attendance. We also invited 2 of our technical education schools from across Eastern South Dakota to bring their students in. So that helped keep our attendance at about 400 students a year. The agenda usually runs a general speaker and talking about different ways that they can initiate conversations and communications with their family that they might be returning back to farm with. Another component that we add in is a lender panel, and the lenders talk about the 5 C's of character, things that they're looking for when they rent or when they give a loan to a beginning farmer, for purchase or agreements, or if they're looking at equipment purchases or those types of things to get started. And then we wrap up with a beginning farmer panel as well. We bring in 3 or 4 30 to 40-year-olds to talk about how they did it. How did they take over their operation? How did they finance land purchases and those types of things? So it's really, you know, putting the kids that were in the seats 10 years ago are now sitting up on the front of the stage, explaining what they did to get to where they are today. So it's been a very well-received program from that manner. You can see that in 2019, I listed that we kind of were looking to change up the program for 2019, 2020. With the change in the valuation of commodity prices, kids weren't 100% returning back to the farm as much as they had been when prices for soybeans and corn and feeder calves in the area were really high. So we've had some changes in some of the conversations that we wanted to have. And then due to COVID, we're basically postponing 2020's event as well. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Whoops, I'm sorry, I didn't talk about that one enough. The conference we geared towards was the intentional conversation. So having those questions, we kind of start with, you know, have you thought about where you live? Have you thought about how you're going to be paid? What about what your job duties are and those types of things? So as we talk about farm transitions and intentional conversations, these are some questions that lead into the whole topic of how are we going to make this happen beyond the land purchase and those types of things. How are we going to farm together and maintain this as a successful farming operation for those that were ready to participate? So next slide, please. The last program I'm going to hit on is our Sustaining the Legacy project. This is an SDSU Extension Farm Estate Planning and Transition Conference. Started in 2006, and our goal was to talk to the landowner generations about the mechanics of an estate. And it's really transitioned to talking more with beginning farmers returning to their operations as well. So we're looking at bringing in that next generation to the farming operation. My 2016 thesis was a look at the way different family members view the transition and how that's going to happen. We evaluated a bunch of different statements about from the landowner generation side, the on-farm heir generation, and then the off-farm heir generation. And there was a lot of differences in what those groups thought the plan should be, what was already in place, and what was going to happen in the future. So the readiness of all those partners involved in the operation and the transition is very important to the success of the operations transition to that next generation. So we've really moved a lot of the dynamics and some of the conversations over to how do we let everybody know what the plan of attack is. So while we still talk a lot about the mechanics of using an LLC or a trust, life insurance, long-term care insurance, and all those types of things, we're also beginning, you know, bringing in that communication about the goals and aspiration of the landowner generation as they move forward. So a lot of conversations on that communication side involved in our estate planning conferences. You can go to the next slide. So different layouts of our transition conferences. We try to have the full conference, which is a 3-day session. It really encompasses a lot of the tools. We bring in industry professionals to try to give some of the presentations, and other things we do are 1-day programs, hour-long programs, and 15-minute programs. So if we go to the next slide, the next 4 slides are a lot about what we try to do with our all of our programs. We try to increase that communication within the family. So if you look at this slide, it says, why we'll never understand each other. It says, what he heard was, you're way too stupid to be trusted driving alone in bad weather. But what she really said was, drive carefully, dear. As we talk a lot about family communications and dialogues, that's important on what we say versus what others hear. The next slide, one of our goals is to provide our producers with the tools. We give them the tools so that they can figure out how to make the best decisions for their family operations. We don't tell them what those are, but we help guide them through the pros and cons of each one of them. Our next goal is to remove some of the mystery of the, maybe click again, remove the mystery of those tools. Here's an ad for blinker fluid, and hopefully you're all aware that blinker fluid really isn't a thing. So we remove the mystery on those tools to make sure that we're using the best tools for our operations. Not just what the tool is, but how to use them, when to use them, and when maybe not to use different parts of the tools that are available. And then our last goal is to keep them motivated. We hope we get them fired up and ready to move forward with their estate plan or their transition plan. But then as we send them out the door, they've also got all of our contact information so that we're not just a splash and dash. They've got our contact info so that we can help keep them moving forward throughout their plans. So with that, that's a little bit about what we're doing at SDSU. Here is my contact info again, if you needed that. Look forward to talking to you if you have any questions about the programs that we put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Our final presentation this afternoon will be given by Christopher Boyer. Chris is an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee. Chris will present a model that analyzes the profitability, risk, and off-farm income needed for starting a cow-calf operation, and will discuss the trade-offs of different strategies such as buying versus leasing land. Chris?
Hey, thanks. So, do y'all hear a bad? Okay, I think we're good. Hey, so my name's Chris Boyer. Like Nigel said, I'm an associate professor at the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee. And this work I'm presenting on is really work coming out of a master's student's thesis here, Jared Bruin. Me and Carlos Treopec and Aaron Smith were on his committee, and we sort of challenged him with looking at what would it take to start a cow-calf operation in Tennessee and then maybe in the Southeast, and what are strategies that would be more profitable than others. So next slide, please. So I have 3 statistics, and really I think our motivation is probably best summarized in these statistics. So approximately 40%, depending on how you carve out the United States, about 40% of all the cow herds are located in the Southeast, again, depending on how you carve out the states and define the Southeast. But it's safe to say that probably at least 40% of all cow-calf operations are located in the southern, southeastern United States. And if you looked at it on a per head basis, there's probably about about the same number of cow inventories in this same region. So, and 33,268. So this is a number from a report that showed that this is the number of new and beginning farmers that are starting beef cattle operations in the United States. And so it out of all the commodities being produced by new and beginning farmers, beef cattle was in number wise the most beginning farmers were starting beef cattle operations. And then 77%, if you look at beginning farmers, young and beginning farmers, about 77% of their household income was coming from off-farm income. So the Southeast is an area that there's a lot of small 30 head beef cattle operations. A lot of these producers have off-farm income, and by quantity wise, there's most of the producers in this region are producing beef cattle. So we thought tackling this question of analyzing the most profitable strategies for starting a cow-calf operation will be helpful for producers in this region. So next slide, please. So that's what we did. We analyzed the profitability and the required off-farm income to start a cow-calf operation. And we built this model, and I'll talk about it here in a little bit, that has a lot of flexibility. And specifically, what we wanted to look at for this presentation is how interest rates and land rents impact the profitability and the off-farm income. And off-farm income, the way we calculated this was the amount of money you would need to pull in outside of the operation to cover the debt services for your beef cattle operation. So next slide, please. So our scenarios that we looked at were a 30 head operation and a 60 head operation. We looked at spring calving, and that this hypothetical producer that would be buying pregnant cows. So that's where they're going to start with. We also assumed different interest rates. So as part of my job, I get to work with Farm Credit Mid-America on a couple joint activities, and I was able to visit with and have Jared visit with a loan officer in this region to really kind of talk through the weeds of what are things that a producer would need to loan out as far as capital they need to borrow to start their operation, and things they'd probably likely need to purchase, and then what are the interest rates and the terms of these. So the young and beginning farmer program in this area would probably see an interest rate for operating cattle equipment loans of about 3.4% today. If you weren't qualified for the young and beginning farmer program, it'd be about 3.95%. So these were the what we're going to call our low interest rate scenario and our high interest rate scenario. And then finally, we also looked at what happens if you have to go rent land to start your operation versus owning land. So you either inherited land or you you acquired land in some way that you owned it already, and now you have this piece of land. What are you going to do with it? And so this way we can see how that land, the cost of renting land can be a barrier to young and beginning farmers versus someone that may own property. So the model that we developed is really, I think, a really neat practical model that Jared put together. We did a net present value simulation model where we're looking at profitability using net present value, internal rate of return for a 30-year term period. We're considering price and production risks in our simulation. So we have variation in production and prices that we're building into this model. And like I said, we can annualize the off-farm income required to cover the debt services. And we can look at how many years a producer would need off-farm income to cover their debt services. So after a certain time period, when would a producer be able to not require off-farm income to at least cover their debt services? So, and the earlier I heard some discussion about really looking at systems approaches for tackling these young and beginning farmer questions and challenges, and that kind of excited me because that was really where we started with Jared. Was we wanted to develop a model where we had what we're going to call a dynamic cattle growth model, where if a producer wanted to start with 5 bred heifers or pregnant heifers or 5 bred cows and build up to 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 head, our model would allow for this kind of slow build over time where they're either retaining their own heifers to develop and put back in the herd, or purchasing heifers. So the model has the ability to scale up if you want to start small and move and become a larger cow-calf operation. And that's really what Jared focused on for his thesis. We also built in some production dynamics, so we can look at things like management practices. For example, if you want to have a fall calving season versus a spring calving season, or a number of head, you want to be a small producer of 30 head of cows, or 200. Do you want to start with cows, or you want to start with heifers? There's really a lot of flexibility in this model to look at a lot of different production scenarios for starting a cow-calf operation. Along with that, we also have the capability of kind of building in a lot of economic scenarios. So we can change things like interest rates, look at buying land and equipment versus leasing land, or having a custom work done, is as far as pasture management, things like that. That we can obviously change how much you're going to pay down, how that impacts profitability and off-farm income. Buying hay versus producing your own hay, that's a big question here in the Southeast. So there's a lot of economic flexibility, as well as production flexibility, that we've built into this model. So next slide, please. So just real quick, the data that we gathered to run these simulations, we used University of Tennessee cow-calf budgets over a number of years, not just the most recent ones, but we kind of looked at them over, I think, about since 2011. So a little time period where we had to see some variation in prices and costs. So the recommendation for nutrition, stocking densities, and all other production assumptions were based on UT extension recommendations. We had monthly price data, assuming we're going to sell a 500 to 600 pound wean calf, steer, heifer calf. We had also built in some selling your open heifers, what price they would bring, and we assumed that'd be about 850 pound open heifer, and then a cull cow price for their cull cows. So, and as far as the purchase of the bred cows and the weaning weights, we were able to pull this data in from a couple experiment stations here at under the University of Tennessee system. So the Plateau Recreation Research and Education Center, they do an annual sale of bred cows, open, unpregnant cows, bred heifers, unpregnant heifers, a lot of variety of females that are being sold in this sale on an annual basis. And so we were able to do some, in short, a regression analysis, hedonic pricing model to kind of figure out how months pregnant and age impacts the price of these. And that's kind of built into that model too. So again, if you want to buy an open, if you want to start your operation with all unpregnant heifers, we can plug those numbers in, and you have a estimated starting value for those females that you have to purchase. We assumed we're buying 3-year-old cows that were about 5 months pregnant, and so this is we chose this for the scenario because this is 3-year-old. It's kind of over. She was able to get pregnant again, overcome the hump of her first calf, and rebuilding her body condition and getting ready to be bred again. So, and 5 months pregnant, that is a fairly safe year one calving rate. And then the weaning weights came from two really long-term cow data sets from Ames Plantation. It's again another experiment station at University of Tennessee, located in West Tennessee, and they have distinct spring and fall calving herds, which is common here in the state, mostly spring calving, but there is some fall calving. And so we were able to estimate how weaning weights change over time as the herd ages, as it goes from being a bunch of 3-year-old cows to being a little older. How does that impact that? So next slide, please. the loan assumptions, again, this is what we just assumed based on our conversations with some nearby loan officers. But the great thing about this is we can, these could be farm specific and they're going to vary across every operation. We just started here as sort of a general baseline, which you're very capable of. We're very easy to change these around. So we assume that on the building side of things, there's going to be maybe a hay barn, pole barn you're going to build. Equipment's going to involve a tractor or truck, hay spears, and then the purchasing of the cows, either the 30 head or the 60 head. And the building, the 4.45% is just the rate for 10 years is what you would get if you're a young and beginning farmer or not. If you qualified for the young and beginning farmer program within this region, in the institution that we visited with, it'd probably be about a 3.4% interest rate. If you didn't, it'd be about 0.5% higher to be about 3.95% interest rate. And we assumed a 10% down payment. Again, that we can change that around pretty easily as well. So next slide, please. So results. So this is the 60 head herd. You can see the first column there, it has the low interest rate scenario. So this would be the scenario where you qualified for that 3.45% interest rate. Then the second column sets of columns is the high interest rate. And so this would be where you qualified for the 3.95% interest rate. And then the change is just the difference between those. So for a 60 head herd over the 30-year production life, the net present value would be about $9,406. Again, and this was a simulation. These are expected values, averages from a simulation. About $9,400 higher if you qualified for that lower interest rate. So that interest rate has what we found was about a 463% increase on your net present value. And then for your off-farm income, there wasn't a really big change. It was about a $467 change over this entire time period. So the interest rate really didn't impact how much it was about a 5% increase or decrease in off-farm income needed to pay debt services. It didn't really have a major impact on how much a producer would need in off-farm income in order to cover their debt services. And we also found they needed about 5 years of an annualized income of these numbers. So 5 years of $8,844 would cover your debt services. So it's about 5 years worth of off-farm income. So next slide. Now this is the 30 head herd. And if you look, it doesn't look too rosy in the profitabilities. The net present value is negative. This is, it doesn't look great. Again, this is trying to pay for the debt that you're taking on to starting this operation. But it's just kind of reality for someone trying to start a cow-calf operation, which is 30 head. It's hard to pay for the needed debt to start one of these operations. So for the 30 head herd, though, we didn't, for the low interest rate, we saw a difference of about $4,546. So it was only about a 5% increase in net present value, which is not near as much as with the 60 head, right? It seems to have, for the smaller herd, at least these preliminary results seem to show that lower interest rate does not have as big an impact on the smaller head, on the smaller operation than it does on the larger operation. And similar off-farm income, very little difference in off-farm income needed to cover debt services. And you would need this amount of off-farm income for about 6 years. Next slide, please. So then we looked at the scenario of you have to pay land rent, or you somehow you inherited the land. So you have no land rent, you own the land. So if you had no rent to pay for your land, for the 60 head herd, your net present value is a little bit north of $40,000, which is about a $28,000, nearly $29,000 increase in net present value from the farmer that would have to rent the same pasture land for the 60 head cow-calf operation. So this resulted in about a 251% increase in net present value. Again, the off-farm income does not seem to be really impacted by not having to pay land rent. You still need to bring in some sort of off-farm income for 5 years to cover your debt services for the 60 head herd. But quite a bit of impact on as far as profitability. If all of a sudden you did not have to pay land, but you started off, or pay land rent, but you started off owning land. So next slide, please. So the last, well, real quick, I'll just, so the land rent for the 30 head, it had about a $14,000 impact on the net present value. So it had a much bigger impact than the interest rate scenario. Lowering the interest rate increased net present value by about 9%. For here, it increased it by about 11%. So, or about 33%, excuse me. So it was a pretty big jump in net present value from not having to pay land rent. Okay, next slide. And then we did just a hypothetical scenario. Let's just say for the first 10 years, you have land forgiveness. You don't have to pay. You're a new beginning farmer and you don't have to pay land rent. What does that do to net present value? So this was just a hypothetical policy scenario. And you saw, so the last column, we'll just focus on that for the time being. We have just a change for the 30 head herd of about $6,500 in net present value and about $13,000 for the 60 head value. So, quite a bit change in the net present value for this hypothetical scenario. All right, last slide. Conclusion. I've kind of touched on all this. One thing I'll say is just future, we want to do a lot more risk analysis across different production scenarios and really build this out to kind of see, how these things compare, not just in profitability, but as far as risk goes too. So with that, I will wrap it up.
Thanks, Griff. Gives us about 15 minutes for questions. I'll start with the ones that have already been submitted, but please feel free to continue to submit your questions, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. I'll start with some of the ones that received the highest votes. This first one would go to, we'll go to Andrew and Karin. It's owning some land. You had categories, you had different land tenancy categories. It says owning some, sorry, this question is moving on me. Well, it's about your categories of owning some land versus renting some land, and whether you, those didn't seem to be mutually exclusive. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, great. I think this is a good question and gives me an opportunity to get under the hood a little bit with how we're dealing with our data. So the first thing that I can accentuate more is that our unit of observation is a state year. So it's an aggregation and an averaging of all of the beginning farmers and ranchers in our age category for a state in a year. And so we do get three variables. One is percentage who own all of their land, another is percentage who rent all of their land, and one is percentage who rent some and own some. We decided to collapse those into rents some or all, and then owns some or all. So basically taking that middle category and attributing it to renting or attributing it to owning. And then in our regressions, just choosing one or the other of those measures, so that between the two different regression outcomes, you can sort of see parts of the whole picture. I'm interested in other people's thoughts about how to statistically handle that. I think we chose what we did to try and be as transparent as possible and to let these coefficients have a more natural interpretation. I don't think we're leaning too heavily on the point estimates of any of our coefficients. I think we're more interested to see the direction and the statistical significance, if any, of any of the regressions that we ran. So hopefully that addresses the core of the question, but I'm happy to chat more with anyone who's interested in more of the details.
Okay, thanks. So this is this one goes back to Scott. This one's asking about the definition of the women and socially disadvantaged and how you define that and how maybe other people define that. Could you just touch on that?
Yes, so I'll be really specific here. The actual report is going to include two separate definitions of socially disadvantaged, one of which that includes women. So the actual text of the law is a little bit vague. So each USDA program agency has its own definition. So I believe it's NRCS, which does not include women. It's either FSA or NRCS. I believe it's NRCS. And so that the results I presented today are for that version. We also include a version that includes women to approximate, I believe, the FSA definition of socially disadvantaged. So they are correct. Most USDA definitions include women as socially disadvantaged. At least many of them do.
Okay, and then just a quick follow-up. When will that, how can people access that report?
So this report is still a work in progress. I can't comment on timelines or anything, but it will be completed in two separate versions, one of which will be submitted to Congress and one of which will be released as an ERS economic research report.
Okay, but you don't have an idea about time then. Okay. Let me direct a question to Jim. I had a couple people who were very interested in this program that you talked about and applying it to other states. Do you think you could talk a little bit about, are there similar organizations that are trying to do similar work, particularly in Colorado? And there was somebody else who was asking about Hawaii. I don't know if you're aware about that. You could just talk about that.
Yes, at this time, I'm not really aware of any specific programs in those locations. What we think is that the experience we had in New York and the experience in Massachusetts and Vermont encourage us to think that existing state and federal easement programs can look to these examples and consider the possibility that the preemptive purchase right or option to purchase at ag value could become something that could be funded through those programs. So ours was a very small program relative to the farmland that needs to be protected in the country, and it was demonstrating the possibility. And again, we looked to Massachusetts and Vermont as well. So no, I think it would be up again, it would be a matter for encouraging the state programs in the state you're in, or reaching out to the federal programs to see if the easements might incorporate this element as well in those locations.
Okay, thanks. Heather, let me direct this to you. Someone was asking whether you see new beginning farmers coming into your region other than younger members of a family taking over a farm. Maybe you could just talk about kind of the breakdown of the new beginning farmers that you're encountering.
So most of the beginning farmers that we work with in South Dakota are returning to a family operation, but a good handful of them are trying to start from the ground floor and beginning either a small cow calf operation, or they're building a hog barn or something like that. So while most of them probably have that farming background and a farming family to return back to, we do have that handful that is taking that next step to be the first generation farmer. So.
Okay. Scott, let me turn another one back to you. A couple of people have asked about the total survey, the 2014 total survey. One person asked whether the data can be accessed or how it can be accessed by researchers and whether it's going to be updated again. And what, yeah, I think why don't you go ahead and just talk about the survey a little bit more.
Yeah, so as far as new iterations of the survey, I don't know what the plan is, but the text of the Farm Bill immediately after the section that mandated my report discusses subsequent surveys being part of the subsequent census of agriculture. So I don't know what the timeline is for that or what the plan is, but that is the text of the 2018 Farm Bill. So at some point, we should see additional surveys to develop a panel for these landlord-tenant relationship variables. What was the first part of the question again? Sorry.
How you can access it.
I've never tried to access ARMS or related data sets as a non-ERS employee, so I'm not entirely sure. Like for us, it's included in the ARMS data. I mean, maybe Jeff could comment on that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I'd just say that, you know, like other USDA data sets, they are available for researchers with individual agreement. You can access them electronically, and you know, we have a process for that.
Okay, Chris, let me send some to you. Somebody is asking about the motivation for farmers to begin a cow-calf operation. It doesn't look, they're saying, you know, it looks like you need a lot of off-farm income. Are they doing this? How much of it's a profit motive versus maybe a lifestyle kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I couldn't, you know, obviously can't speak for every producer out there, but you know, we have a lot of part-time cow-calf operators in the state that do it primarily, you know, for a lifestyle versus profitability. So Heather may have some more to add on that, but the motive of profitability, there's a lot that want to get into cow-calf operations to make money and to start being, you know, producing something. But yeah, it would be hard to gauge to know the motivation of the individual.
Okay. Heather, did you want to say anything about that? Just talk about.
Well, you know, profit's always important because they like to eat and feed their children. You know, so a lot of the conversations that we have, you know, is how to make a profitable operation for that next generation as they come back to the family farm or start their own operation. So whether you have that off-farm job to help get yourself started, start small, start medium-sized before you would jump in with both feet. So a lot of that is part of the motivation is to generate profit, but there's a lifestyle component, you know, living in the rural country and smaller communities that does play into some of their decision-making when some of the newer beginning farmers come back at 45 or 50 years old, not the 20-somethings out of school, back and forth that way. So they're looking at ways that they can be profitable, but maintain a lifestyle that maybe they grew up in or something that they view as being a preferred lifestyle than a big city living or something like that. So kind of a combination of the two components as you get into that motivation factor, but something I haven't specifically asked them. This is all anecdotal from their conversations I would have.
Right. I'm sure there's a lot of variation across people, right? So to go back to Andrew and Karin, I've got a question that's asking I think you may have touched on this in your last answer, but wouldn't the relative cost of ownership versus tenancy affect net income, et cetera? If a farmer owns a small parcel and rents a lot versus a large farm with a small rental acreage or carries ownership only. So, you know, obviously, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this accentuates how fuzzy the data are that we're trying to use to ask a question about an operator level question, right? So if what I see is a state level aggregated average, but the question is really about at an operation level, how land ownership or rentals and costs and everything affects household income, there's a big limit to what I can say. So I think the big takeaway that Karin and I have from what we've picked up is, despite sort of taking a 100,000 mile view of this question, we're still seeing some interesting correlations pop out of the data, which really suggests that there's something there to be explored. And I think this is exactly the type of question that then we need to go and look at more operator level data. Can we pick up the same sorts of relationships, and can we say something more about the mechanisms by which we're seeing these larger correlations?
And following up on that, I sort of know the answer to this already, but for the benefit of the audience, what are the difficulties with accessing the individual level data, or why aren't you using individual level data? And then another data related question is, why did you choose the states that you did? And why not smaller regions, or et cetera?
Great. So we're using all of the states that we have access to. So that's restricted by sort of the data that are available. And the most honest answer about why we're not looking at more individual level data is we started this project a couple months ago. And the process to get access to the more restricted data takes quite a bit longer than a couple months. So we see this as the beginning investment into a longer research trajectory.
But you were also interested in effects happening over time too, right? Or to some extent, did you have a? Or was it purely cross-sectional? Did I misunderstand the?
So we're taking okay. So great. Part of the problem with ARMS is that it's not a panel data set. You don't see the same operators over time. However, if your observation is a state, you can turn it into a panel, so I can accommodate for sort of regional differences over time in that way. So there is a time dimension that I can't. So that's one benefit of using the data that we do use, but we don't get to look at operator specific ledgers or anything like that.
Right, that was the answer that I thought you were gonna give me there. Let's see here, how are we doing for time? I think probably maybe just one, maybe two. Well, let me go back to Jim. Somebody's asking about profitability. They say, wouldn't it help greatly if these farmers and future farmers if they were profitable, wouldn't they be able to maintain ownership? In other words, isn't that really the limit here? And then there's like a broader sort of philosophical question of why are we sustaining farmers that are not profitable if there's somebody else willing to pay more for the land?
So those are great questions. It's the issue is there's really good farmland, for example, in the Hudson Valley that of which it's finite, it's limited, and the market isn't a perfect system. Highest and best use, when the land is being out-competed by the investor or the attorney who works in New York and wants a second home in the Hudson Valley, they're not using the land. It's not the land's productivity. The land will give more because they own it. They're taking it out of its productive ability and telling farmers to move away from the city where the people need food and away from the good farmland because they can't outcompete people who are able to earn more in this economy than farmers are. That doesn't make sense. So really, it's not so much an issue of the farms are productive and are viable farm businesses, but they happen in an economic environment where land prices are being pushed up by very unequal earning abilities of one profession versus another. So unless we all want to be investors and have no farmers producing food, we need to do something to keep that farmland in the hands of farmers.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock Eastern time. I think we have to wrap it up here, so we have time for people to sign into the next session. But thank you very much. Thank the audience. I'd like to thank all of our participants. It was a great discussion, and I appreciate everybody